I'm about to share my secret to losing 90 pounds and keeping the weight off for the next 15 years. It's not a medication and not even really a diet. Well, not completely. This is a story I never really tell because it is so personal. And to be quite honest, it makes people feel uncomfortable. But I decided to share it in this video because it is so pivotal to my life and the reason that I lost weight. So I will warn you, there are a few tragic events throughout this story, but there's also some excitement, and this all happened 22 years ago now. So please don't feel bad for me. And I actually hate pity. I promise I am okay now. Okay, so I should let you know too that keeping the weight off actually isn't hard when you know what to focus on. And if you choose to do it this way, you will be one of the few that can actually maintain weight long term, because only 5% of people can do it for more than 5 years. So this is where my story starts. I was 28 years old when I gave birth to a stillborn baby girl. I was 26 weeks pregnant at the time, and it was the most horrendous experience of my life. At the time, I had struggled with my weight seriously for 10 years, going around in circles, but I was always chubby anyway. It got out of control in my late teenage years. I'd never really figured out how to stick to a diet. I'd already started studying nutrition at that time. I was a couple of years in, but I really started studying nutrition to help myself to lose the weight. But the first couple of years in nutrition is actually all biochemistry and anatomy and physiology. It's all the core subjects. So you don't really get into the nutrition subjects until about year 3. I gave birth on the 31st of October, which is Halloween. Yes, cruel joke of the universe. And to be honest, most of that day is a blur now. I've worked hard to accept my past and to move on with my life. So on the 3rd of November, 2003, 3 days after giving birth, I sat in a hospital bed and I was emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually traumatized. I was actually really sick because I had preeclampsia, which is why I'd lost the baby. I felt completely alone and in a daze because of what had just happened to me. I was terrified for my own health because my blood pressure was through the roof, and I knew just enough about the human body to know that I was at serious risk of having a stroke or something. And of course, the emotions and hormones surging through my body didn't help. I had breast milk leaking everywhere. And even though I was in a private room in the maternity ward, mind you, I could hear babies crying all around me, which was driving me insane because everything in my soul wanted to get up and feed a baby. This was my first real lesson in how strong hormones really are. Because I'm telling you now, if there was an inch of me that was even slightly unhinged, with those hormones and that instinctual nature, I could have stolen a baby and gone off and fed the baby, because that's my inner being. It's all I wanted to do. And it really was driving me insane. And I just want to say as well, leading up to this event in my life, I went to the hospital because I did not feel well. I had a throbbing headache. I had liver pain and I knew that there was something wrong. And so I went to the hospital and I saw a professor, which is one of the highest ranking doctors. This was a teaching hospital. So I saw the professor and he sat there and lectured me about being so fat. He took my blood pressure. It was high. And then he told me to eat healthy, and that was it. He dismissed my concerns. And then a few days later, or maybe it was a week later, there I was in hospital giving birth to a stillborn baby. And this is why when I talk about taking responsibility for our own health, it comes from that place. It comes from having a doctor dismiss my intuition and my knowing that something was wrong. And it could have near killed me because I was in serious trouble. And now, 22 years later, I am very determined to take full responsibility for my own health and not let anybody else make the decisions, because what happened to me is a perfect example of what happens when we let somebody else take responsibility for our own health and we suffer the consequences, not them. He never even saw me again. So he doesn't even know what happened, And yes, it makes me very, but it is what it is, and there's nothing I can do about it now. Nothing is going to change the fact that the baby died. But that is why when I say we are the ones that suffer the consequences, that's where it's coming from. So if you've heard me in other videos talk about that, now you know where it comes from. So anyway, It was a very, very intense situation. No words can ever really describe what was going on within me in those first few days because it's all a blur. But one thing was for sure, I was sinking into a deep depression and I knew I was at serious risk of not being able to find my way out. I was really not coping. Sitting in that hospital bed, something deep inside me did shift. I blamed myself for the baby because I thought the weight was the problem. And so I decided I needed to lose the damn weight once and for all and actually do it this time. It was the first time I was really, really serious with myself. It was not another binge today, start on Monday type of diet. It was real soul searching and a real decision. And it wasn't just about the baby. I'd been unhappy for a really long time. I felt worthless, although I never would have used that word back then. I was oblivious to my true feelings because I stuffed them down all the time with food. I felt ashamed of myself. I felt like I wasn't good enough, not seen. It was real self-loathing when I look back. So what did I do to cope in the first couple of days? I told my partner to go and get me a whole lot of junk food. And I decided the best way to deal with what was going on was to eat my emotions away. But I did also promise myself that that would be the last binge. So I ate until I wanted to vomit, but I promised myself that was it. That was the last time. And it was the last binge for a really long time. In hindsight, starting that weight loss journey probably saved my life because it gave me something to focus on, something to occupy my mind and obsess over while I dealt with the trauma and the grief. I'd always been pretty good at ignoring my own feelings anyway, but at least in that situation, it actually helped. Here's where it gets really interesting though, and this was the biggest shift. I vividly remember sitting in that hospital bed feeling terrified that I couldn't stop being addicted to food. I was so scared because this time I was serious about losing weight. I was scared to disappoint myself again because I was in a very fragile state. I was afraid of what might become of me if I couldn't do it. I felt so low, I honestly couldn't imagine going on another diet and failing again. And looking back now, I understand that fear really came from a place of giving up an addiction. And in my mind at the time, my life depended on it. The stakes were very high. Really though, underneath that fear, in hindsight, now I know, really that fear was coming from a place inside me which was questioning, how will I cope without the food? Because I was using food to numb my feelings all the time. And of course, the thoughts weren't quite that clear at the time, but honestly, I didn't know what life would look like without my addiction to food. And it was terrifying. So I started by counting calories, and not long after, I started exercising. I still hadn't learnt about nutrition at this point, so I did what I knew. I started on quite high calories because I knew I couldn't allow myself to get hungry because that would send me into a spin. And if I went into a spin and I was too hungry, it simply wouldn't work. It was that simple. And I also made a couple of other rules for myself. So the first one was that I had to feel excited about every single morsel of food that went into my mouth. And the reason I did that was because I knew if I didn't get the addiction kick from the food that I was eating, because now it was so limited, that this wouldn't last. The other rules that I made were pretty simple. It was have a meal rather than grazing or snacking. And when I did eat a meal, it had to be low calorie, good quality food. And I had to be excited about it because after all, I needed my dopamine hit, right? I also saved calories most days to allow myself to have a chocolate every evening because that gave me something to look forward to. And it was sort of like bargaining with myself. You know, if you can get through the day, then you can get this reward at the end. Now it seems silly because now I would never do that. But at the time, it really did help because it taught me self-discipline around food and it gave me a little bit of balance. It was letting go of the addiction and instead having some balance around food. So maybe a month after, I made myself exercise every day without fail, which I actually grew to love. I became addicted to running in the end, which was something I never thought would happen. And even these days, I wish I could go for a run, but my knees are completely shot, so running's probably not the best option. But I did really love my morning runs. And on those morning runs is where I learnt the secret to not only losing weight, but keeping it off long term. So picture this. I was in a place in my life where I was utterly miserable. I decided at some point in the early days that I needed to change my entire life from the inside out. I wanted to become a different person. On those runs, I didn't just make goals about losing weight. I made other goals as well. I had a picture of a woman in my mind that was not me, a well-traveled, well-educated, happy, confident woman who actually liked herself. And this was the first key to lasting weight loss. I was building a new life, not just losing weight. I was building a new me. My weight loss journey was becoming much bigger than just about the number on the scale. And it started with the belief that it was actually possible, because in the beginning, I had tried so many times and failed that I really didn't know if it was possible for me to lose weight. I remember thinking that this probably is never going to work, because I'd never been able to do it. And I also didn't trust myself. I had lied to myself so many times before that I didn't even trust myself anymore. So what I decided to do was I focused on 1 kilogram at a time, 1 day at a time, one choice at a time. I knew I could lose 1 kilogram, so I focused on that. It was the exact same approach that I took with my studies. I knew I could get through one subject, one exam, 1 day, and so on. The future that I wanted seemed like a mountain so huge. But if I just focused on what was right in front of me, what I was doing right now, then maybe I could get there. So I focused on just today. I could eventually get where I wanted to go, doing it that way. The next key was the way I spoke to myself. And this was a big one for me. One morning I was out running and I had an epiphany. I became acutely aware of what I thought about myself and how I spoke about myself to myself. I became aware of how much I was calling myself names, putting myself down, and just generally not having a very high opinion of myself. And even worse, I allowed other people to treat me with disrespect as well. The woman I saw in my future, the one that I wanted to become, would never speak to herself that way, and she absolutely would never let other people treat her with disrespect. So I decided to start speaking to myself as if I was my own best friend. Instead of calling myself an idiot and so on, I'd call myself darling or something lovely and kind, And I actually realized after a while that when I spoke to myself in a negative way or had those negative feelings about myself, that was a major trigger for binging, which I never realized. And it wasn't the only trigger for binging, but it was definitely contributing to my old addiction more than I ever knew. And I also want to say something here as well. This is important to connect. I never, ever would have connected those dots had I allowed myself to continue binging. You really only notice when you stop the addiction. That's when the space is created to get these golden little nuggets of insight, which we normally cover up with food. I mean, that's what an addiction's all about. It's about not feeling and escaping whatever the reality is at the time. So once I got into this habit, I decided I could probably do a complete overhaul on my thinking in general. I developed a way to train my own mind, thinking in a way to transform from where I was to the person I wanted to become. I became more in touch with my own feelings, which drastically reduced my need to binge because I wasn't trying to stuff down feelings with food anymore. I have always journaled, but at this point, I was really journaling. I really ramped that up. And I was learning a lot about what was really going on within me at the time. So working through the grief and working through other past traumas that I'd experienced just through journaling. And I found that I felt such shame and self-loathing, which I never realized until going through that process. So 11 months after I started, I had lost 41 kilograms, which is 90 pounds. I reached my goal just before I turned 29 years old. And you know what? There were a couple of really funny experiences going through that journey over that year. As part of my transformation, I changed everything because remember, I wanted to be someone different. If somebody could have handed me a magic key to run out of my life and into somebody else's life, I would have done it. But anyway, changing myself was the closest I could come. So I changed everything about the way I looked. I went and got braces, which I only kept on for 7 months, but it did help. I went blonde. I was now tiny and I ended up looking very, very different to what I'd started. I wanted to really enjoy life. It wasn't just the outside, the inside had changed as well. No more sitting around binging and watching movies to escape my life. I wanted to live. So one night I met up with a girlfriend of mine who I hadn't seen since I'd lost all the weight, and we had planned on going clubbing. So she's waiting for me in the street, in the city, and I go up and tap her on the shoulder because she didn't recognize me. So when I spoke, she literally gasped in shock and almost fell over. And even to this day, when I remember that, I think it's so funny. But there's something about my voice, because people kept on telling me I can't recognize you, but I know your voice. And so that night was the first time a guy approached me in a club, the first time in years. And it actually scared me a little bit because I wasn't expecting it and I had no idea how to handle it. On another occasion, I flew interstate to go and visit my cousin who also hadn't seen me since I'd lost weight. And her and her husband were waiting for me at the airport. When I walked up to her and started talking, she kept on turning her head away and not looking at me. And so after a couple of minutes, I said, "Why aren't you looking at me?" And she said to me, "It's because you don't look like you. It's not you. I know it's you because it's your voice, but it's not you." And so that was funny. It gave us all a good chuckle. And her husband was standing there just staring at me with his mouth open. On a different occasion, I was at the shopping center and saw my own reflection in a window in front of me through the crowd, and I actually thought that I was looking at my younger sister because she's always been very tiny and, long blonde hair and all the rest. And who knew we actually look alike when I'm slim? So I got very excited thinking that I was about to see her until I realized it was my own reflection that I was looking at. So that gave me a chuckle. And then at the very end of my weight loss, I decided it was time to go clothes shopping. So I didn't do any clothes shopping at all during the whole 41 kilo loss. I waited until the end because I didn't see any point in going and getting clothes and then having to chuck them out. So I go shopping for clothes. I was standing in the dressing room. I had no idea what size I was. And so I was trying on a few different pairs of pants and they were literally falling to the ground because I had overestimated how big I was. So that was fun. And another really interesting thing that's happened, which nobody ever talks about, by the way, but one day after my run, I came home and I was in the shower and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I could see my own girly bits. Nobody's ever said that that's happened to them, but it happened to me. And it was so surprising and shocking at the time. And I never even thought about the fact that I couldn't see prior to that day. But there you have it. I guess that's denial, right? This transformation was a remarkable journey. Nothing has ever come close. That year started as the very worst time of my life, but it ended up being the best year of my life. Not just because of the weight loss. That was the catalyst. But it was so much more. It was because I never really stopped becoming that woman that I wanted to be. I don't really think about that much anymore. But I tell you what, now I am a well-educated woman. I have traveled more than many. I like myself. I have plenty of confidence. I've got great friends. I have built myself a great life and it all stemmed from that experience. And I've never really stopped growing. And, I probably won't. So when people ask me, how did you do it? Back then, people used to ask me all the time, how did you do it? How did you keep the weight off? How did you keep yourself under control? And the answer is this. I looked at every single part of myself into the deepest corners of my soul. And out of that, I found out why I was overweight in the first place. And then I went about training my metabolism and my mind to become a different version of myself. Now, it's important to understand there were times over the years when I gained a few kilos back if I'd traveled or whatever, but I could always take that weight off pretty easily, pretty soon after I'd come home. And there were certainly a couple of times when I did binge again. Not often, nothing like before. I've actually had quite a lot of death in my life. So a couple of years after I lost my baby, my younger brother was murdered in an altercation. That sent me in an absolute spin. And throughout that process, I did binge a couple of times. And then a few years after that, my father took his own life. And that also sent me into a spin. But you know what's weird? Even through all of that tragedy and even through all of that grief, I still didn't gain weight back. I binged a couple of times, but I was still living the life that I had originally created. So I didn't actually, you can get away with binging, once in a blue moon, which is what I did because I was still, eating normally, 99.9% of the time. I think also having really solid beliefs about what happens to us when we die helped me to cope through all of that death. So if you've watched any of my other videos, you might be wondering, how can you go through all of that and not end up gaining all the weight back, like not end up going back to binging to control your feelings? And I can understand why you might be thinking that. So I will explain. So my recent weight gain was actually a combination of things, really. Most importantly, I stopped eating the way I always had. I went vegan for 3 years because I saw some things on social media one night which I could not unsee. And I've always been an animal lover. So when I saw those things, it hurt my soul so much that I decided, that's it, I'm going to stop contributing to slaughtering animals and everything. And don't get me wrong, I actually don't feel bad about an animal dying to eat it. I feel bad about the way that we do it. So anyway, I went vegan. And when you go vegan, you start living on carbohydrates, which my body could never handle. I am quite certain that I went from being perfectly healthy and slim to all of a sudden being an overweight, insulin-resistant, menopausal vegan. And on top of that, at the same time, my marriage was breaking down, which was really heartbreaking for me because I loved him so much, but I couldn't stay with him. And with all of that going on, I started binging again. And I know you might be thinking like, oh my God, you went through all that other stuff and a guy made you start binging? I know, right? It's bizarre. Maybe it's the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't know. But anyway, that is why I gained weight, because I was binging on vegan, very, very rich carbohydrate foods. And until I decided that I'd gotten so insulin resistant that I had to stop being vegan because it clearly wasn't working for me, which was a whole nother story in itself. But yeah, I was grieving the loss of my marriage. But you know what? Through the whole thing, I would tell myself, because this went on for maybe 18 months or something, I would tell myself that it's okay because you've done this before. You know how to stop it. You know how to lose weight. When you are done with stuffing down your feelings, because you got to remember this time I'm aware of what I'm doing, right? So I would just tell myself, when you are done stuffing down your feelings and you're not hurting anymore, we can get on with it and lose the weight, which is what I did. But I will tell you, the one thing that I never did was go back to loathing myself. I never ever went back to speaking about myself negatively or even feeling ashamed of myself. Being overweight this time was a very different experience because I still had my self-respect and my self-confidence. So how do you keep the weight off? You have a major shift in perception. And I think it does take a major shift deep within you to create lasting change with anything, not just with weight loss, but with anything in our life. There has to be a mindset change so strong enough to hold you in place no matter how hard it gets, because everything will get hard at some point, you know? But brain training was a big part of that shift for me because our brain directs every single thing that we do. Anyway, this is my story, and I hope that it helped you in some way. And if you would like to try brain training for yourself, it is part of my private membership. So I will leave the link down below for you to check it out if you'd like. I will put a video up here for you to watch next. And I hope that this video did help. I hope that you could take something out of all of that to help you on your journey as well.
Smarter Nut Nutrition, DLP done well.